Jujutsu Kaisen sequel introduced the grandson of Maki Zenin and Yuta Okkotsu, a young sorcerer named Suguri. He's similar to Maki in the sense that he also has heavenly restriction, which means in exchange for enhanced physical strength, speed, and perception, he doesn't have any cursed energy, or at least that's what some may believe. You see, in a recent chapter of Modulo, Suguri was able to accomplish something Maki was never able to, with his usage of a simple domain. This allowed him to instinctively intercept any attack that invades the range of his domain, akin to Ultra Instinct. The crazy thing about this is that he achieved this state by merely using the cursed energy within his cursed weapon, bypassing the requirements needed for barrier techniques. This then poses the question of how, and why wasn't Maki able to achieve this? Well, the answer to that question is a bit complicated. You see, Suguri has a cursed tool called Hanoyagi. Initially, it seemed to only possess the ability to produce flames. This happens when the sparks generated from the scabbard are infused into the blade, generating flames powerful enough to dispel barriers. Fast forward to chapter 5 and he's able to use a simple domain called Maculation, which allowed him to intercept attacks from multiple grade 1 entities at the same time. And while this of course is very impressive, the function of the simple domain isn't what's fascinating. It's more so the usage of the simple domain itself. You see, this all goes back to the limitations of someone who possesses heavenly restriction. Maki, for example, outright implied that she doesn't have the ability to use simple domains. This came after Akari said that the plan would require someone that possesses domain countermeasures, which of course is referent to a simple domain. And Maki replied saying that she doesn't qualify. This would make sense since someone like Maki that's heavily restricted doesn't have the curse energy needed to perform a simple domain, which also explains why Hakari said that he wasn't talking about Maki, implying that he also knows this to be true. Yet fast forward to Modulo, Suguri is able to perform a simple domain, albeit using the curse energy channeled into his sword. Now this could mean one of many things. It could be the case that Maki could have also used a simple domain by wielding the cursed energy inside her cursed tool, such as Dragon Bone that had the ability to accumulate cursed energy, or even Playful Cloud or Soul Splitter. All of these weapons were wielded by Maki at some point in time, all possessing cursed energy and the ability to amass it. So it could be the case that performing simple domains through cursed energy within a cursed weapon is a skill Maki simply didn't possess or even thought possible. Which also implies that Kusakabe, a master in simple domains, also thought this was impossible as well, thus opting to not teach it to Maki. This of course would make perfect sense, but only if we assume that Maki and Suguri are indeed the same. You see, there's been some conflicting information on which level of heavenly restriction Suguri possesses. Some believe that he is the same as end of series Maki, who possessed zero cursed energy. This is the pinnacle of heavenly restriction, which only few have achieved. In fact, Toji was seen as a once-in-a-lifetime anomaly based on Yuki's statements. Apparently, most heavenly restriction users simply have low amounts of cursed energy, on par with regular humans. Maki was only able to achieve this level when her twin sister passed away and took all of her cursed energy with her, while using the rest to create Soul Splitter. That allowed Maki to eventually become fully realized, even reaching the level of Toji himself. Now when it comes to Suguri, it's a bit more complicated because you have Maki's statement in chapter 1 where she says that Suguri is a lot like her, which could be used to imply that he has the same level of heavenly restriction. Then there's his sister Yuka, who just outright says that Suguri doesn't have cursed energy, which is pretty straightforward. Combine this with Marmalade Boy saying that he used the cursed energy channeled into his sword to use his simple domain, and it crafts the picture that is already fully realized with no cursed energy. The problem with this is that there's also a statement saying otherwise. The trafficker in chapter 1 states that Suguri's cursed energy is weak, not that he doesn't have any. In fact, Suguri was recognized by the barrier technique, which is what transported him to this guy's base. This is only possible if one has cursed energy, since fully restricted users can't be recognized by barriers due to having no cursed energy. So it does seem like Akutami is pulling us in two directions, that is both fully restricted with no curse energy, but he also has weak curse energy and can be picked up by barriers. Something simply doesn't make sense. Now, the most likely case is that Suguri isn't fully restricted and Yuka was simply incorrect about the level of curse energy he possesses. This has to be the case because, again, he was picked up by the barrier, which is only possible when one possesses curse energy. And the trafficker outright notes that he has curse energy, it's just very weak. So when it comes to Maki saying that Suguri is a lot like her, she's more so just referring to the fact that he also has heavenly restriction, not that his restriction is the same level as hers. Suguri is more so comparable to pre-awakened Maki, who also had some level of curse energy. I would also note that Maki said that Suguri gets stronger through loss when asked what she meant by them being alike, but it's also a double-edged sword, so you have to be careful. Leaving things is also important too. This could be referring to the fact that she had to get rid of her curse energy to get stronger, which means Suguri will have to do the same thing someday as well. The problem, of course, is that Suguri doesn't have a twin, which was relevant in Maki's case since they were both linked and shared curse energy. When Mai died, she took all of that curse energy with her, which is what allowed Maki to ascend. Now, this isn't the typical case for most heavenly restriction users. Even Toji, for example, didn't have a twin and was seemingly born with this special kind of restriction, being able to defeat pre-awakened Gojo and had the power to wipe out the entire Zenin clan all by himself. Though there's the possibility that Toji wasn't always like this, and had to lose his remaining curse energy to get to this point. This is based on the narrative statement that refers to Toji as the one who left it all behind, which serves as an interesting parallel to what Maki said to Suguri. He gets stronger through loss, and leaving things is important. Now, this could mean many things. The end product, of course, is getting rid of one's curse energy, but it does come at a cost, thus being a double-edged sword. The cost for Maki was the life of her twin sister Mai, but what was Toji's? He also had to leave something behind, but what was it? Was it his status, his humanity, or was it his son Megumi? Is it possible to enhance one's heavenly restriction through a compounding binding vow that erases the user's curse energy at the cost of something they hold dear? The answer is maybe. We've seen how Sukuna abuses the mechanic of binding vows to even change the innate functions of his own techniques, applying properties that weren't present initially, as seen with his divine flame. One could assume that Toji found a way to achieve this as well, which Maki later discovers, thus her statement to Suguri. Or maybe Toji was simply born that way, and the line about leaving everything behind had no bearing on his powers. Suguri could also be a once-in-a-lifetime user as well, that simply matures to this state naturally after losing a loved one. You know, the typical shonen level up system. I will say that even though Suguri is heavily restricted, he has no issues seeing curses, unlike Maki, who had to use cursed tools in the form of glasses, at least until she was fully awakened, gaining the ability to perceive curses with her 5 senses similar to Toji. This again does lend to the idea that Suguri is already fully restricted with 0 curse energy, but I did explain why that can't be the case based on him being picked up by the barrier, in addition to the statement from the trafficker. Now, some have argued that maybe he was picked up because of Rika's ring that has some curse energy, which can make sense. The problem is that Gege is really smart, so he accounted for this argument by having Suguri's sword be left behind by the barrier, because it had too much curse energy. This established that the barrier has the ability to distinguish curse energy signatures between individual items, and even gauge how much energy that item possesses. So it would have been able to distinguish between Suguri's and Rika's curse energy levels, thus only teleporting Rika's ring, leaving Suguri behind. So Suguri must have had some level of curse energy himself for the barrier to detect him, thus not being fully restricted. This of course doesn't explain how he's able to see curses without the assistance of a curse tool, but one can simply say that he has enough curse energy to be able to do so, even more so than pre-awakened Maki did. This could also imply that he's weaker than pre-awakened Maki. That is if we assume that the more curse energy an heavily restricted user has, the weaker they are. But that doesn't have to be the case. There's also a possibility that, as I said before, he's a special case like Toji, just in a different way. This perk allows him to detect curses with his 5 senses, even while having curse energy, unlike Maki. So as you can see, there are many ways to explain this and Gege just has to choose one. I would say that when it comes to Suguri's simple domain, we aren't quite sure how it actually functions. Marmalade Boy did say that he uses the curse energy channeled into his curse tool to perform it, but that could mean one of two things. Maybe Suguri himself has the skill to perform a simple domain and he uses the curse energy generated by his sword to manifest it. Or it could also be the case that the sword itself is imbued with the ability to perform this special kind of simple domain, and Suguri channels his small amount of curse energy into it in order to activate it. The latter option stems from the notion that one must have even small amounts of curse energy to activate the technique of a cursed weapon, which would support the idea that Suguri does have curse energy. The problem with this is that Maki was still able to use the techniques of Dragon Bone and Soul Splitter even after losing all of her cursed energy. In fact, it's outright stated that Dragon Bone works off the will of the user, not their cursed energy levels. Now, of course, you could argue that this wasn't stated for every weapon, so maybe that's just the case for Dragon Bone. But it's also implied to be the case for Soul Splitter since she was able to use its ability as well after losing her cursed energy. I mean, even Toji was able to use a myriad of cursed tools, including the Inverted Spear of Heaven, that had the ability to nullify other cursed techniques. So I think it's safe to say that fully heavily restricted users can use the abilities of cursed tools, which also means that argument can't be used to support Suguri having cursed energy. I do, however, find it interesting that the old man thought it was something impressive when Suguri did it, but maybe this was his first interaction with an heavily restricted user and he simply didn't know it was possible before that. This of course is assuming that the tool itself is what has the ability to use the simple domain, but I don't think that's the case. The most likely answer is that Suguri himself has the skill to do it, and he uses the energy from the weapon to amplify it. This is possible since Suguri does have some amounts of curse energy, which allows him to learn Jujutsu even more so than pre-awakened Maki. This would then validate post-awakened Maki saying that she can't use simple domains, and everyone else agreeing with that. Because if it was the case that she could use a simple domain with zero curse energy, they would have taught it to her as well and she could have channeled the curse energy from her curse tools to perform it. So Suguri is likely special in the sense that he has more curse energy than the typical HR user, but he isn't fully restricted, which is what allows him to see curses and perform Jujutsu. However, because his curse energy is still weaker than the average sorcerer, he needs to channel more from his tools to amplify his techniques. So is Suguri's goal really to become more like Maki, or is it to become something else, someone that can use the best of both worlds? I guess we'll see. Also, as a side note, there's the possibility that Suguri has small amounts of curse energy because Rika's energy is leaking into his body. So maybe Suguri is secretly overpowered and the clan is trying to restrict his prowess by giving him Rika's ring, because if he has curse energy he can't reach his true potential, and Maki knew this, which is why she told him that he doesn't need a ring and leaving things behind is okay as well. This is just my small conspiracy theory, I could be wrong, but I guess we'll see. With that said, if you guys liked the video, drop a like, and if you're new, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.